have a special treat. We are with someone who has carved a path of greatness for herself and is also from a legendary family. But the first question I ask everybody is give me your first and last name and then the title you want to use during the course of the interview because there are so many ways you could describe yourself.
Bernice Albertine King. I give all of my names in full because I was named after both of my grandmothers. Um, and I have, yeah, well, I guess we could use CEO of the King Center. Obviously, I'm the daughter of Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King. Um, I could go on and on,
But
but
you have a couple of other enterprises that you're also.
yes, I'm working in partnership with Ashley Bell, who some people know here in the city. We were in Leadership Atlanta together, and our class was really challenged to look at what was going on because we were right between the pandemic and when George Floyd happened. So we were still in our class. We were supposed to graduate that April, and everything shut down in March. So they had to extend our class to June, and in May, George Floyd occurred.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
so the consciousness was much higher at that point, and they're like, what can we do to really, you know, uh, change and transform things? So he started talking with one of our classmates, and we started looking at how do we help black banks, because as we know, a lot of these larger deals, development deals, black banks are not able to compete on them because there's only so much that they can lend. There's a lending threshold. And so we found a way to bring them together collectively to compete on deals, and we helped to to be refinanced the practice center at the Hawks Practice Center at Emory University. That was one of the first deals we did with the National Black Bank Foundation. And so that dovetailed into a history that Ashley had with his family in banking. His family owned a black bank back in the 60s, 70s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, and I think they lost it around some racial things. And so he was approached by a gentleman that there was a bank for sale in Utah, of all places. It's a long story. I don't want to go into it because I know we're just doing introductions right now.
Mm-hmm.
We can talk about that in a minute. But so we're doing some things in that arena. We can talk about that later. There's a fintech company that we have together to move renters to homeowners. So that's on my business side. I have my own very, 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 very small business that I started in 1995 because I was doing a lot of public speaking. And just from a tax perspective, to use wisdom, I said I need to incorporate a company so that I can receive a salary, I can pay into, the Social Security system, etc. And so I started First Kingdom Management to represent me now in terms of public speaking events. If I do any kind of book deal, any business ventures, I do most of them through First Kingdom Management. Any public appearances, if I happen to do any endorsements, all of those kind of things, I do through First Kingdom Management.
And here's what's exciting about listening to you talk about business. People think that civil rights has no financial aspect. And we're going to go back to the
They also think that ministry doesn't
come on with
either.
it. Yeah.
Churches, I know people don't like this because some people have, taken advantage of it the wrong way. But churches have to be run like a business. It is a business.
It is a business, and specifically when you have so many people are trusting. But we're going to go back to the conversation that we started before the interview, and that is even during the lifetime of your father, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., he had Operation Breadbasket. So I'm going to ask you to tell me about Breadbasket, and then I'm going to ask you a follow-up question that I didn't get to discuss.
So it was in, I think, 1961. I may be a little off on the year. It could be 61, 62. They started an arm of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC, called Operation Breadbasket. It was their economic arm to start looking at how do we encourage and put pressure on these companies to hire more black people, promote black people, increase salaries, etc. That's how it originally started. And it was based off of the notion of if you respect my dollars, you must respect my personhood. So that's where that originated. And they would call on these corporations to find out, how many are in your employ. At that time, we would call Negroes. Where, what positions, and then make a certain kind of demand, about, increasing that or whatever the case. The laws were a little bit different then in terms of labor laws and everything. And if they didn't make those changes, then that's when they would use my father called it economic withdrawal, to use it as creative tension for them to come to the table and talk about fulfilling those things that SCLC wanted to see with, the types of jobs, employing more black individuals, etc. They eventually started creating other aspects to what they were doing. They started building homes in communities. In fact, there's a community here in Atlanta that's just off of I-20 where they built the first housing development, and it eventually became Marti King Jr. Villages. I don't know what it is today, but it's right off of 20, right where 75 and 85 intersect with 20. If you go straight 20 east, it's to the left of the highway if you're going east. But they had a plan to scale that across the nation. Now, understand that SCLC was founded by 100 faith leaders. So they were working collectively. This was kind of their para-church, if you want to call it that way.
And they were all across the country.
And they were all across the nation. So when you talked about extending your reach in terms of this economic arm, they went all into Cincinnati and had impact there, Cleveland, Chicago, and there were other places. And there was a plan, to really economically build up the black community. And I always say to people, when I started listening to my father's last speech to the SCLC convention, it wasn't his last speech, but it ended up being his last speech. And he gave an account of the work that they had done through SCLC. It was amazing. And all I could hear as he was talking about it is he was in the middle of building an economic infrastructure for the black community. And of course, that was cut short. But right here in Atlanta alone, they helped to increase the income of the black community by $25 million. Now, that sounds low today, but that was more like 250, 300 million. And that was annually.
That's amazing. Now, one of the other things that we talked about when we get on this topic, and I just kind of want to follow your lead here. We live in a global community where there are omni companies. In other words, companies that it's great that you're fantastic in your hometown, but you really need to think bigger.
Right.
What has happened in the African American experience that we don't have global?
I think we don't trust each other. And when something gets too large, it can lose a little bit. You lose a little bit of control. So I think some of the roots of that is just the trust. Some of this comes from enslavement, and what has happened to us as a community.
How can it change?
Jim Crowism. Well, I think some of it is changing because a new generation, they tend to collaborate more than I've seen, the younger generation. But now we have to kind of elevate it to how do we create these conglomerates, these enterprises that, span the nation and the globe. How do we make sure that we have an industry, like the hotel industry? I can't figure out why we don't have a national hotel chain that we as a people own. Why don't we have an Uber?
Why don't we have a national chicken chain? I mean, my grandmother cooked chicken better than anybody else. I mean, everybody has a recipe.
Like why don't we have a Chick-fil-A? That's what you're just saying, something like that, or what have you. I think because we suffered so much in enslavement, it did something to each individual identity. and passed on, there's this need to have my own. And I don't know if people understand that we can have our own with each other. You can still have your own with each other. It's how you form the relationship in business and can still, I mean, just imagine if we had, just deal with the hotel. I mean, as we know, Hilton, Marriott, Hyatt, they all have other smaller brands under their major brands. So imagine if we had, if you want to look at it this way, we had one singular whatever here. We could create the other franchises, because they franchise out those names, across the nation and still be connected into the major hub. We have to start thinking that way. I think we think, I want my own, I want my own, I want my own, and our percentage is too small for that. You know, if we were 70, 60% of the population, maybe so.
But 44 million people isn't a small number.
No, it's not.
It is not a small number. I'm going to extemporize a question based on this history that we're talking about. What would have been different in America if the Montgomery boycott had spawned a taxi company that went national?
That became like, it was the first Uber, really.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh my, that would have been powerful. That would have been extremely
And how did we miss
It would
that?
have set a foundation for other models of business, I think.
And how did we miss that? I mean, it's great looking back 50, 60 years from now and the conversation that we're having. Why that was the ultimate business opportunity, and we weren't thinking about, I mean, of course, the number one thing.
Yeah, that's a good question, why we weren't thinking about creating the business model. I think because, when I look at what happened in the 50s and 60s, there's certain things in order to grow and compete in eventually a global economy that we had to address. At that particular time, our voting rights were very limited. You know, there was a smidgen of people who had a say-so in government that affects policies as to how these businesses are even run, how they're regulated. And I think my father was thinking systematically. And I don't think people have studied that side of my father. You know, why this versus this. Because Uncle Andy always says, we didn't know what we were doing. I challenged that by saying, maybe they didn't know what they were doing, and not saying my daddy knew 100% what he's doing. But from what I've studied around my father and looking even at my mother and how she did things, they were systematic thinkers. And I think this had to come before this and this. That's part of strategy, too. So I think the need to first deal a death blow to segregation was necessary. Because, I support, let's all support black businesses. I've been doing that all my life. But at the same time, I want to make sure our black businesses and the money that circulates in our community, I'm getting some of the white people's money to come back into my community. I'm getting some of the Asian people because they are customers of our business. Back then in segregation, we had to stay confined to a particular area. We couldn't be in Buckhead with a business, a legitimate business. We have restaurants now that are all over Atlanta that black people own. That wouldn't have happened if they hadn't dealt with de jure, by law, segregation. And then we definitely can voice our concern about how small businesses are being created because we wouldn't have had a vote.
Wow. I mean, and many people who are listening to this podcast don't understand that those of us who are of a certain age, not only see the sequence, but understand that it took a visionary to establish it. And it's hard to follow a visionary. Now, I'm going to go back to one of the questions that we actually wrote. And feel free just to kind of bounce back and forth because that's the purpose of this conversation. People associate you specifically with the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Center for Nonviolent Social Change. We just told them how the stuff you do. But few people know that you also hold a doctorate in law from Emory University and have a theology degree, and you are the first person to do that as a dual degree at Emory, and that you're also involved with other business enterprises. Why not? Why did you want to do business? I mean, you told us about the speaking and that strategic thinking, I need to get paid from this.
And
What?
I didn't want double taxation. So that's why I created a corporation too,
Yeah.
self-employment tax. So let's back up.
Okay.
I got a call to ministry when I was 17. I wrestled for 8 years. Won't go into that for today.
And the number 8 is your special number.
It is. It very much is. Answered that call on the eve of my 21st birthday by doing a sermon, first sermon at Ebenezer Baptist Church. Then 2 years later, I got ordained. So during that time period, from graduating from Spelman College and getting ordained, I decided to go to Emory University. I applied to Vanderbilt, Emory, because they were the only two schools, who had a dual degree between the Master of Divinity, which most people who are going to go into pastoral ministry do, versus a Master of Theological Studies, people who just may want to, teach the Bible or whatever, and a JD degree, a Doctorate of Jurisprudence. Those are two schools that had it. Emory gave me a full ride at both schools. So naturally, when I thought about it in Vanderbilt, I went to visit, I thought about it, Lord, we're going to have to pay for me to fly here. We're going to have to pay for the law school because they didn't give me a scholarship, the theology school. I said, I'm going where there's a free ride, so I don't have to carry any debt. So I went to Emory, and at that particular time, it was a very new program. And when I started the program in 1985, I was actually the first official enrollee into the program. The gentleman who was already there had transferred in from Vanderbilt. He did a year somewhere else. So I'm the first, I always say, the first official graduate of the 5-year program. Separately, they're 3 years and 3 years. And so, fast forward, I spent about 10 years at an inner city church here. I served 8 years as an assistant pastor. I've always had, in the midst of all this, I've always had a desire to want to branch out into some other areas, production, because I feel that media and entertainment can really influence in a very positive way, even though we see a lot of negative. I wanted to be able to influence positively in the culture. For some reason, I had in my mind, I was at New Birth at the time, and I said, I want to be a bank. I didn't know what I was saying at the time, but I was basically saying I want to be in a position where I can distribute money to people, not just needlessly, but for purpose, on a mission, money on a mission.
Like venture capitalism.
Yes, exactly. And there's business in my family background. My mother's father was a businessman. He was the first black to drive a truck hauling lumber in Marion, Alabama, Perry County, Alabama. He got threatened a lot, pulled over to the side of the road, and just all kind of stuff. He decided to buy his own lumber mill. They burned it down after 2 weeks, but it didn't stop him. He was industrious, so he decided, I'll do something else. He went back to cutting hair. He eventually built a new home because the home that my mother was born in ended up burning down. But when he built their new home, he also built a store. That store is the equivalent of what we see today in our, urban communities as a gas station. What do you call them?
Convenience store.
Convenience store. So he was that in that community. Had 2 tanks of Gulf oil and all of that. So here I have this businessman. My grandfather, on the other hand, and to a certain extent, he was one of the initial board members of Citizens Trust Bank. So all of this is in my background, and when I went through Leadership Atlanta, and Ashley and I connected, and he started talking to me about things he was involved in. I said, hey, I'd like to join you on the journey. And that's how we got connected on this journey. And it tied into what I felt was a continuation of my dad's work.
How so?
How so? I was getting ready to say that. Well, the first thing is, outside of the bank thing, I thought about my grandfather. I thought about the fact that my grandfather was not only a board member, he was a stockholder in Citizens Trust. And when he passed stock on to all of his grandchildren. I still have stock at Citizens Trust Bank. And so when he started talking about helping black banks, I've always been passionate about that because I never understood why we didn't have a national black bank. I understand a little bit better about rules and regulations and how that can happen. But we had a lot of black banks, and now we have less than 20.
Wow.
Which is not good. And I remember having conversations. I won't call any names, but having conversations about how can we get some of the banks to merge, so we can leverage more of these bigger deals and all that kind of stuff. So when Ashley came to me, and he was talking about the National Black Bank, I said I want to be involved because I thought about my grandfather and his work with Citizens Trust Bank. I bank at Citizens Trust. I wanted to be very supportive, and then it dovetailed into this fintech company. And he said, I'm trying to get renters into becoming homeowners because I want to deal with the racial wealth gap. And I said, that's a continuation of what Daddy was doing, was trying to get ahead of the wealth gap that now has widened, since that time. So it's like, hey, I want to join forces with that. So the idea is when you sign up for Ready, and we have to scale.
Let's talk about Ready Life. Okay,
that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying is let's give a definition of
Okay.
What it is.
Okay.
We know who you're involved with on it. I know because I did the research on it.
Right.
But let's tell the people this is the first time they've heard the phrase Ready Life.
Right, Ready Life. Fintech company. The purpose is to move renters to homeowners. Now, as we all know, when you're getting ready to purchase a home, they pull up your credit report. You're required to have a down payment, all that kind of stuff. And depending on what your credit report is, determines whether or not you'll be able to even get a loan and all of that kind of stuff. And then depends on your finances, whether you have the money to pay down, where you can tap friends or, organizations and entities that help with down payment. So we decided let's bypass the credit score because the pattern of most people who rent is to pay their rent on time. Yes, there are people who don't, but the majority of people do. That's the one thing they do, but they don't get credit for it, which is not good. We should be considering that on a credit report.
Why is that, do you think?
We know the systems and structures.
No, I know
created.
we know this is, but I mean, basically the rent, utilities, things that people basically have to have are not part of your credit.
Because those are things we pay as a community. So anything that's I just feel like there's been this concerted effort, and I don't know if there's an organization behind the scenes, but from generation to generation to hold us back as a people. I don't know why we are a threat. That's what I don't understand. I don't know why people put forth all this effort. There's a lot of theories out there, but I think that's they will hurt themselves just to get to us. Which makes no sense.
No sense. And before you sit there and go, oh, she's just spouting a conspiracy theory, I want to talk about Social Security for a while. There were laws on the books that made sure that people who cleaned houses, did yard work, were janitors, could not pay into the Social Security system. Why? Because Southern legislators did not want them to have the stability of a Social Security check. So it's not outrageous to say what we're saying.
Because the way they felt about black people.
Yeah.
So now, fast forward to Ready again. So we look at we get you to sign up, pay your rent through our platform. And so consistency after a period of time, 6 to 9 months, then we work with you to help get you in a home that you're not paying much more than what you're currently paying as rent. So we are now focused in Cleveland, going to be moving to Detroit. We're going to scale it eventually, but we're having to create the model. And I don't want to say too much because some of the people run with how we're doing it. Mm-hmm. But we're working with some developers, working with some municipalities so that we get these homes or land and we're able to build the homes in a way or repair them in a way that when the person moves in, they have equity in the home. But I don't want to tell all that because it could be trade secret.
Well, I understand that.
But you end up, we've just now created a lending company, a finance, because we want to help finance the mortgage, help with the down payment. But in our model, when you convert from a renter to a homeowner, you have equity in the home already.
That's brilliant.
It's brilliant, and Ashley has a brilliant mind.
So give me a little bit. How long have you been doing this? And then after Detroit, I know you have a bit. Okay.
So it's been being built for about 2 to 3 years, and it takes time because you're working outside of the traditional method of doing these things. So when you're innovative like that, people are seeing things, but they don't know how many years people have been working on it.
Yeah, wow.
So that's the Ready model. So we'll have Ready Mortgage, Ready Lending, so all together so that we can support the people. And then there's financial literacy, because we want to make sure, because I remember when I bought my first home at 28, my mother said, "You don't need a home."
Why'd she say that?
Well, a parent is protective of their child, and she's concerned if I know enough and all of that kind of stuff. And
Where did you buy your first home?
In Southwest Atlanta.
Okay.
I decided to get the foundation laid and then, starting building it out before I told her. So at that point, I'm 28 anyway, but still, it's like, I'm sorry, Mom, I'm already in a contract. So she eventually laughed about it, and she said, "Look, baby, there's more to a home than buying it." She says, "I want to talk to you because there are things like, emergency repairs, there are things that you have to keep up with periodically, all of that kind of stuff, and you have to budget for this stuff." So that was the kind of reason she was saying it, because you were just in having a home.
I thought you were going to have some place to live that would be your own.
But I got tired of renting.
I know.
I wanted something on my own.
No, I'm going to jump around to another question, and it's like, I ask the question, what about finance and the whole concept of money trips black people up? And you were questioning me on me. You were kind of making sure that
I'm like, what do you
what
mean
you
like
talking
that?
about? Okay, but we just started talking about it, and the fact that even when we make the step to homeowners, car owning, investing, okay. This is, I'm nobody's definition of young, but this is new to a lot of us because
Still.
our parent, my mom didn't know anything about investing. She could save anything, but investing.
Mm-hmm.
So when I say trip black people up, what is it that we are still learning as a people, as communities, as educated, hardworking, contributing members of society that we still haven't caught up from some things that folks knew in the 1940s that weren't black?
Well, some people can call it financial literacy. I know John O'Brien taught financial dignity. I think it all goes together. We have had to fight so many battles in our community. We haven't had the privilege of sitting down and being able to teach our children these things, because some people are working 2 jobs, and other people, they might be working a job, but we're doing a lot of community stuff because we got to support the community, because people are not where they need to be. So we just don't have the same extra time that other communities have had.
But even
that's one reason.
Okay, what about knowledge of money, knowledge about how to grow wealth? We're not talking about wealth transfer.
We've been denied a lot. That's one of the things that we hadn't had access to for a long time. We have now more than ever before. But at one point, we were denied access to information to even understand all of that. I think, personally, because think about it. Our folks put your money under the mattress, and the women tuck it down in here. I don't trust the bank. We couldn't trust institutions because because of the way we were treated. We were locked out of the system. Then even if we got into the system, we find out, how come they have greater access than we have? So the trust issue, you know. So we're having to overcome all of this. And I think we're slowly getting to a place now that we begin, because of places like the Rice Center, the work that John's doing, we're enhancing and increasing our knowledge, the work that, the Urban League does, and the institutions that are, taking financial literacy in the schools, they're doing stuff in communities. So we're increasing our knowledge now. But the behavioral patterns of our past have to be broken. And we have to see that modeled, because we struggle with saving and investing. We know how to spend. And, we always say the assets are, and y'all know what I mean by that take the E after the E off and the TS. You know what I'm saying? For us, we have to show up. We think our value is in the stuff and things like this, as opposed to the stuff and things that increase in value. We don't understand appreciating assets and putting money there. We don't have to show. Think about Warren Buffett still living in that little house,
in Nebraska,
driving that little truck or whatever. I mean, you don't have to show off your wealth on your body, or with your garage, all them cars or whatever. Unless they're like classic cars, because those can be an investment. So people don't know. I mean, people didn't take time to say, save 10%, invest this, after you give too, because we talk giving to the church. And then it's okay to spend on yourself, but don't do that necessarily first.
I mean,
other than essentials.
Oh, yeah, other than essentials. And what about the whole attitude of how much money we have as a community?
Oh, my God.
44 million people. I think it's 1.2 trillion.
Collectively. I mean, we've always had Daddy pointed that out even in his speech, how much we had collectively, and if we could pool those resources. That's the key. How do we find a place that we can trust, where we can get those resources pooled to create an infrastructure for our community? I'm just baffled that we haven't figured this out yet.
And there are other people. Booker T. Washington, who was the original founder of the National Negro Business League, and the Atlanta Business League is the last thriving chapter of that whole organization. They were the first group where you actually had black people get together, because remember, it was illegal for us to get together and talk about things. So the black bankers, the black lawyers, the black grocers, they first came together under the ABL aegis. Do we need something like that now?
Definitely. But, I think there's something that can be done through the churches too.
Give me an example.
Wow. Well, we talked about it. When you think about why didn't we turn the original Uber into Uber with a boycott? There's still a market there. Some people are becoming, is it Lyft? There's people getting a little distrusting of certain things. I think there are things that we can look at that we collectively do a lot of, and bring the minds together with those in the business community, and start and find a financial company where we can pool these resources together and begin. I mean, it's hard for me to talk it all the way through, but I see it, and I just think it can be done. Think about the number of churches you have in this nation that have more than 1,000 members. There are a lot of black churches that have more than 1,000 members. I don't think we realize it. Now the average church size, 200 members. But it doesn't even have to be just in the black community. There's a way to create it in a way where you cross over too. But I don't know what it is about mine, my own. And that's good, but we're at a stage now, especially in terms of what we're up against now. we're going to have to think at a larger scale at this point, because the what's coming at us now is enormous. It's gigantic. And we, what I appreciate about, and I actually texted him, Pastor Jamal Bryant, the other week. He was in his pulpit and he was pulling his young people and had already connected with these HBCUs and got commitments to send these young kids, to all of these schools. I think it was up to 400 or so kids to school, thinking outside the box. He said, we may have to show up and make sure these people are fed, at these schools now. We spend a lot of time on the quote unquote resistance side, but not enough on the building side. Sometimes we can talk from a place of victimization instead of place of empowerment. Like, now what? Now that this has happened, what we gonna do about it? The way they were treating Montgomery is like, this is now the time with Rosa. We got to do something about how they treating us on these buses instead of just, talking about what has happened and what is happening. In the meantime, it has happened and we're not going to get it undone. So how are we going to fill in the gap? We got to fill in some gaps right now. So now we got to think more collectively. We got to think more from a giving spirit place, an other-centered place. And I'm spiritual. I believe when you operate from the framework of God's nature and character, he comes into play. When you operate outside that framework, I don't know if you can count on him or not, but I know definitely when you operate in his framework, he comes. God is a giver, so we got to start thinking, what does that mean? You know what I'm saying? It's just I don't want to go too far.
And what I always tell people, now we just saw the business person take off that business jacket and get in the pulpit because the Reverend Dr. King just showed up here. You started preaching. The Spirit really touched you. I mean, and your heart opened up on that. I mean, it's important to you, and I have to go. And we're skipping around. We had questions. I really
did definitely had questions.
I really did send her questions. But
tough questions.
Well, but one of them was kind of important to me, and that is, you were asked to pray for somebody that everybody else in the world sees as the spiritual leader. I want you to take us up to that moment, tell us who it is, and then I want you to take it back as to how you felt, because you weren't prepared for that, were you?
No, it was not a part of the script. So some people I know arranged for me to meet with Pope Francis.